Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 360, and we're covering Gaudium et Spes 85 and 86 on economic cooperation is good but needs rules. This is by far the longest one that we have left. I think it's 600 and some words. I don't think any others top 500. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how wars start with unjust hearts and the international community needs to build peoples up to avoid wars. Today, we are continuing Chapter 5, the fostering of peace and the promotion of a community of nations. We're also continuing Section 2, the setting up of an international community. And today, the summary is a little long. It is, we need economic development, including foreign aid to poorer countries or developing countries, but these should work so those countries can develop the whole human and end up self-sufficient. Paragraph 85 has 3 subparagraphs, but we'll read them all together. They are about how we need international economic cooperation, which includes foreign aid. Let's begin with paragraph 85. A. The present solidarity of mankind also calls for a revival of greater international cooperation in the economic field. Although nearly all peoples have become autonomous, they are far from being free of every undue dependence, and far from escaping all danger of serious international difficulties. B. The development of a nation depends on the human and financial aids. The citizens of each country must be prepared by education and professional training to discharge the various tasks of economic and social life. But this in turn requires the aid of foreign specialists who, when they give aid, will not act as overlords, but as helpers and fellow workers. Developing nations will not be able to procure material assistance unless radical changes are made in the established procedures of a modern commerce. Other aid should be provided as well as by advanced nations in the form of gifts, loans, or financial investments. Such help should be accorded with generosity and without greed on the one side, and received with complete honesty on the other side. C. If an authentic economic order is to be established on a worldwide basis, an end will have to be put to profiteering, to national ambitions, to the appetite for political supremacy, to militaristic calculations, and to machinations for the sake of spreading and imposing ideologies. What this whole paragraph 85 is talking about is this importance of cooperating more in economics as we are more interdependent, more interconnected. Right now, in 2025, we're even more so than in 1965. And we can see this in things like the 2008 financial crisis. Basically, U.S. banks were giving out bad loans to people for houses, which made U.S. real estate prices skyrocket. And the result of that was a global financial downturn, significant global financial downturn. And in this, different peoples have different degrees of autonomy and dependence because no nation is completely autonomous or completely dependent. A lot are quite dependent. And one of the things here that's talked about is it's not just economic aid. That's important. But you need money. You need that money, but you also need skilled humans to develop it, to bring it to fruition, to profit, to development for people. I can think of my own family. From my grandparents down, we have 5 doctoral degrees. The other 4, other than mine, are in much more practical fields that are going to make you a lot more money. Engineering, chemistry, business, things like that. And if we think back to 1965, that 5 PhDs is more than a lot of nations had. And this idea is important. Well, what happens? We're going to send these international students to these developed nations, and the challenge is to make sure they come back, make sure they study hard, they learn well, and they come back. And we're also going to have some foreign specialists. And so that's the whole challenge. And then with that, you also need money. Right now, North Korea is one of the countries that suffers the most. And one of the big things, they can't build the proper facilities to extract certain minerals they have in mines or to manufacture really anything or almost anything in their nation themselves. So they end up just exporting coal to China and Russia, and that's about it. And that's not a great way to make a whole ton of money for a whole country. Obviously, the goal here at the end, it notes, is reducing profiteering, political domination, or eliminating it. I think it's good to hope for the elimination, but I also think it's unlikely to happen in our lifetime or anything close to our lifetimes. So I'm not going to hold out a whole lot of hope for that. Paragraph 86 is a little confusing about subparagraph numbering. There are 7 subparagraphs, including the introductory one, and then several are split into 2, but I'm just going to use the A, B, C, D as appears in the text, even though sometimes that is actually, I forget which 2 of them are actually 2 subparagraphs. I think it's B and C, have 2 subparagraphs under that, and then there's one before, there's 7 total, but there's A, B, C, D, which will be the outline. So A talks about how the top form of wealth in a nation is the labor and expertise of that nation. B talks about how richer countries need to respect poorer ones. C talks about how we need to make sure funds set aside for development get there, the anti-corruption subparagraph. And then D, we need to respect values beyond economics. So let's begin on 86A. Before we get to A, it has kind of an introductory line, which is, the following norms seem useful for such cooperation. And this obviously leads into the 4 norms we're going to talk about in this paragraph. So 86A, developing nations should take great pains to seek, as the object for progress, to express and secure the total human fulfillment of their citizens. They should bear in mind that progress arises and grows, above all, out of the labor and genius of the nations themselves, because it has to be based not only on foreign aid, but especially on the full utilization of their own resources and on the development of their own cultures and traditions. Those who exert the greatest influence on others should be outstanding in this respect. So that kind of introductory one gives us this idea of each of these are norms for cooperation between nations in economics. I think this subparagraph is kind of summarized sometimes by some of the memes you'll see online where it says, "Hey, you got the watermelon off the plant, and you can sell it for that much wholesale. You can sell it that much retail. You can make like a watermelon slushy or whatever else. You can sell the same watermelon for that much money." And there's a lot of truth that how you can develop the things are often very valuable. Like you have these various rocks we dig out of the ground. And then you have small fraction of those rocks in iPhones or Android phones or whatever, or computers and things like that. That little rock, that's kind of a microscopic thing inside your iPhone or whatever, can often be more valuable than a rock would take my whole hand to bear, and it would be difficult for me to lift up. Why? Because it's developed. And that's this idea of this importance of human labor and skill. These are the most important things for economics, the most important asset. And also the things built with human labor and skill. As I was reading this paragraph, I was thinking, if a nation could control one small area of earth as far as riches, what would be the best area to control? And I thought about it for a bit. I said, you know what? The highest tech factory of Taiwan Semiconductor, TSMC, is probably what people would most want to control, more than any particular mine or any particular resource extraction point. Why? Because you can make the highest tech there makes the best computer chips in the world, bar none, the smallest little wires and things like that where they're getting to, unbelievable levels. And with that, you have so much economic activity, so much more than anywhere you can extract or even a big factory that can build big things, because that builds very small little computer chips. And so this culture is developed when people are developed. We need people to be developed for the culture to be developed. And here, there's a note that we should work for total fulfillment, not just economics. That's a repeating theme that the Council Fathers have in this paragraph, is this idea that we don't just say, hey, it's just economics, just make more money. No, it's a whole person. Moving on to 86b, it talks about how richer countries need to respect poorer ones. There are 2 subparagraphs, but I'll just read straight through. Let's begin. B. On the other hand, it is a very important duty of the advanced nations to help the developing nations in discharging their above-mentioned responsibilities. They should therefore gladly carry out on their own home front those spiritual and material readjustments that are required for the realization of the universal cooperation. Consequently, in business dealings with weaker and poor nations, they should be careful to respect their profit, for these countries need the income they receive on the sale of their homemade products to support themselves. So we noted the goals in the previous subparagraph A there, and now we realize that rich nations, most of the people listening to this, I think, are in rich nations, have a duty towards poor nations in supporting them. Now, rich nations here is obviously relative, because a lot of us, like in the U.S. or Canada, we look at the richer people in our country, we're not that rich. But if you look at the things we have, the kind of overabundance of food, the travel, vacation, basic, even things that are almost considered basic necessities now, we are much better off than the vast majority of the world. It's something to be thankful for, as well as kind of our own spiritual life. And it's important here for nations that are better off not to exploit the weaker and poor nations for their own self-profit. But instead, they want to help them become self-sufficient. Let's move on to 86C. Again, it has 2 subparagraphs, but we'll just read straight through. The summary is, we should make sure funds get set aside for development to get there. This is kind of the anti-corruption subparagraph, as I noted. It doesn't use the word corruption, but looking at issues of foreign aid and things like that, I think that's really the best way to summarize this paragraph. I think even atheists and a lot of people like that will agree, unless they're the ones getting money from the corruption. Let's read 86C. It is the role of the international community to cooperate and promote development, but in such a way that the resources earmarked for this purpose will be allocated as effectively as possible and with complete equity. It is likewise this community's duty, with due regard for the principle of subsidiarity, so to regulate economic relations throughout the world that these will be carried out in accordance with the norms of justice. Suitable organizations should be set up to foster and regulate international business affairs, particularly with underdeveloped nations, underdeveloped countries, and to compensate for losses resulting from an excessive inequality of power among various nations. This type of organization, in unison with the technical, cultural, and financial aid, should provide the help of developing nations need so they can advantageously pursue their own economic advancement. So this subparagraph is reminding us that this international community needs to help and promote the development of less developed nations. Kind of piggybacking on B above. And so, how do we regulate arrangements to ensure justice? And many times, it's very easy for richer countries to take advantage of poorer ones, smaller ones, less economically developed ones. And that's a challenge. And it also notes here that we need to set up organizations to monitor this to help the countries. And these organizations shouldn't just provide money, but also the expertise so they can use that money effectively to really develop their country. Whether that's, hey, we're going to develop a manufacturing base, or hey, we're going to develop tourism here or something like that. So these countries actually develop and they don't just end up, oh, we got money and we live for today. It's that kind of idea, teach them to fish, don't just give them a fish. Let's move on to our last subparagraph, 86D. It's on the need to respect values beyond economics. Let's read it. D. In many cases, there is an urgent need to revamp economic and social structures. But one must guard against proposals of technical solutions that are untimely. This is particularly true of those solutions providing man with material conveniences, but nevertheless contrary to man's spiritual nature and advancement. 4. Not by bread alone does man live, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Matthew 4. Every sector of the family of man carries within itself and its best traditions some portion of the spiritual treasure entrusted by God to humanity, even though many may not be aware of the source from which it comes. So this is really getting after these unjust social structures and building a form of development that doesn't just say, hey, here's the money, but says, hey, let's look at the spiritual development. Let's look at the person as a whole, their meaning, the things like that. And ultimately, we need to work on our spiritual nature. We need to advance it. We live on God's word. We don't just live on the bread and water and things like that, or whatever we eat and drink. And that's an important aspect of our spiritual nature. And different nations have different aspects of the spiritual treasure God entrusts to mankind. This spiritual treasure is entrusted by God, Yahweh, the Trinity, however you want to refer to the true God. And obviously, not everyone is going to be aware that exact source of in the true God. But there is a great spiritual resource in every nation and peoples. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. I do this podcast on a volunteer basis, and my local religious community relies on donations to help pay our bills. If you want to support my community, you can go to patreon.com/frmatthewlc. There's a link to that and a one-time donation as well on my own site, frmatthewlc.com. You can also donate to support StarQuest at sqpn.com/give. Tomorrow, we will continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium Spes 87 on the challenges of rapid population increase. Right now, the world is worried about the opposite, population decrease rapidly in the next few decades. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, and Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.